Hi, and welcome to episode 4 of the Emmy, Myself and I podcast. Technically, it's been a while since we have made one and released one. I know I've just recently put the other episodes back up on this YouTube channel, but it has been since 2018 that we made a podcast. And whilst those podcasts were the group, today is just going to be with myself. But before I get into it, I just want to say thank you to everybody that watched episode 2. This is the first thing that I've recorded after it. I know I said that I was going to try and do some pieces to camera and some podcasts and stuff for Emmy Awareness Month, but hay fever and a bit of busyness at work and all sorts just sort of got in the way of that. But I'm so thrilled that people seem to have enjoyed the film and seem to have found that it's a fairly accurate portrayal for other people's struggles with Emmy. So that's very thrilling. And I'm also going to apologise for any background noise. I have just tried to wait for this car alarm to stop and it is still going on. But we're going to plough through and we're going to continue with the podcast regardless. So apologies if that is annoying. Know that it is annoying me also. But what's this episode going to be about? It is about what it was like to get diagnosed with Emmy, because I think that's an interesting story and sort of represents some of the struggles that we have on a sort of basic level. You know, there's the struggle of health and then there's the struggle to be believed and to get a diagnosis. So that's what I thought I'd share today, which was just what my story of getting diagnosed was like. So I'm going to take you back now to the year 2001. Back when mobile phones were bigger, back when internet was slower, back when Facebook and Twitter and Instagram didn't exist, back when the hot shows on TV were Friends and Buffy and The Simpsons. So taking you way back. So it was 2001. I had just finished junior school. So for anyone that doesn't live in the UK, junior school is between the ages of 7 and sort of 10, 11. You probably just turn 11 potentially as you're leaving, or certainly in my case, because my birthday's a May birthday. So I'd really loved junior school. I'd had a great time there. I'd had a few health sort of problems in that time. I'd been suffering with abdominal migraines and had a couple of stays in hospitals, but overall that particular didn't really affect me on a day-to-day basis. It was, I might have an attack once every 8 or 9 months and it lasts a week or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of where the story sort of starts, which was going into high school, which is a big transitional time in anyone's life. I was very excited for it. I was very ready. I think I'd been ready for 2 years. And I was kind of coming off a high. I just won something called the Curtsy Cup, which basically means that you're the most polite student. It was the big trophy to win at my school. So I just had got that for year 6. So I was just ready. I was so excited. Like I said, the shows I was watching, like Buffy and things like that, were set in high school. So I was ready to go on my own high school sort of adventure. I had my friends. I knew that we were going to be in the same form group. I knew that we potentially were going to be in the same lessons as well. So it was just a very exciting time. And so I started high school in the September. The first month went great. But then I started to feel sick, sort of very run down, no energy, very, very like a flu. And at first we thought it was potentially just like another one of my migraine attacks, because a migraine had come with it. But we did go to doctors and he said that it was a bit of a cold, bit of flu, and maybe that maybe brought on a migraine attack. So I took a week off and then I recovered and went back into school. And then the following week I had another attack and then that cleared up a week later and then I went back, and it sort of went on in that pattern for about a month or two with the have an attack, then go in, then going back in, and all the time we went back to the GP, and he said, it's just a flu or a bit of a cold. So yeah, like the advice was, whenever he's feeling better, send him back into school. So that's what we did. Whenever I was feeling a bit better, I'd go back into school because that's where I wanted to be. That's where all my friends were. Like I said, it was a very exciting time. It was a new school. So I wanted to not miss out on that much. And also, like, obviously we took the advice of a doctor, and he was telling us to do that. So we followed along. And then what happened was, it must have been maybe late October, I got an attack again, and we thought that it might last a week, but then it rolled into week 2 and 3 and 4, and it just didn't go. It was very worrying time. So then obviously once I wasn't recovering from the attacks, that's when the doctor started to look into other things, and I was sent for blood tests and brain scans and full body scans. Obviously, there was, with the migraines and there was potentially sort of some worries that maybe it could be a brain tumour or something like that, which obviously all the scans come back clear. And this started the cycle of what happened next. So we were sent to a children's specialist in our local hospital, and I will cover his name even though I really don't want to, but I will say Dr. Jones. So we went to this doctor who had us do more tests, more blood tests. It was a back and forth thing. And then once things started to come back clear, he started to go down a different path, which was an odd path, especially because when we went in, I think for an appointment, my mum and dad at this point had known that this stuff was coming back clear and started to do their own research into what could be wrong with me and putting in my symptoms and trying to find what was wrong with me. And ME was one of the things that came up, and they were convinced I had ME. Like, they knew I had ME because all the symptoms lined up. I, at this point, was practically bedbound. I was so sick. So they went in and they said, could it be ME? And Dr. Jones said that he did not believe in ME and would never diagnose someone with ME, and that it couldn't be that because it wasn't real. That was obviously, I'm paraphrasing the wording, and it is a long time ago, but that was in essence what was said. So that was that put my parents probably back on their heels a little bit. And then that's when he went down this other route of investigation, which was, he sent my parents out of the room and asked me if my parents were hitting me or abusing me. Asked them if they were abusing me. And that was he was like a bull with a red sheet. He just kept on going for that one thing. He was convinced. He had it in his head then at that point that I was being abused. So that was a very upsetting time, I think, for us all. Obviously it was upsetting for me, but I think probably looking back, it was potentially even more upsetting for my parents, who had to go through that, which is sort of unimaginable, really, that you could be accused of abusing your own child. Was probably a major low in their lives, I would say, and put a massive strain on them, because at this point there was no diagnosis for me, and they were now potentially facing someone wanting to take me away from them. So I remember that was a stressful time, and I think that was the only time in the whole process that they did ask to make sure I wasn't making it up. And that was obviously very upsetting for me, because it felt at that time that, maybe they didn't believe, but honestly it lasted like a minute, and then they went, okay. It was, they were brilliant throughout the process, because they believed wholeheartedly. And not just that, at that point they were pretty much convinced that I had ME, but they sort of had to let it go, because that's what the the specialist wanted them to do. And also, like, yeah, they were now facing something way different that they had to address, which was kind of trying to prove that they weren't abusing me. Anyway, at this point, I was still being sent into school because he said, this specialist, can I get my words out? Specialist, said to keep on sending me into school. No matter how sick I said I was, keep on sending me. And it was to the point where I couldn't even lift up my bag. I had to drag it into school along the floor. I was very, very sick. And I would last maybe half an hour in a quiet room and then have to be sent home. And it was a back and forth day after day. It was awful. It was awful. And then one day, my mum was picking me up, like I said, half an hour into the school day, and the headmaster came out and said that he'd heard about what was happening with me, and that as a school they felt that they knew when someone was really sick and when someone was faking. And from what the teachers had said prior to that, I was not the kind of person I was very in love with school, and I had friends, and I had my own little group, and I got on pretty well with everyone. So he said, like, just look at him, and at that point, I think my face was in a constant state of panda eyes, so the round rings around the eyes, and he said, get a second opinion. And at this point, like I said, we were maybe like 5-6 months into the process. So, imagine this going on for that amount of time. It was a massive strain. And obviously, like, I've heard afterwards, from other people in the ME community that sometimes that diagnosis takes even longer for other people. So, relatively, I suppose I was lucky that it was a shorter period. But still, it was awful. So anyway, we got a second opinion. And again, as much as I want to say this doctor's name for a different reason, I'll protect them and say it's Dr. Davis. So anyway, we went to see this new child doctor, and straight away diagnosed me with ME. It was so quick. It was unbelievably quick. And was sort of, again, very surprising because for my parents, that was an avenue that they'd explored maybe like 3 months prior. And now we just had a diagnosis so quickly with this second doctor. And I think for everyone, it's funny because when you get diagnosed with something, the instant reaction, I'm sure for a lot of people, would be how overwhelming it is and sort of upsetting and sad and all that kind of thing. It wasn't that for me. As sick as I was, it was just nice to have a diagnosis that people could believe me. No one could question me. It was confirmed. I could say what it was, and we could go from there. For example, by having a diagnosis, we were able to. I was able to not have to go into school no more, and I was able to get a teacher to come out for 3 hours a week. And so I was able to get a bit of education in whilst also not having to fit in with an education system that no longer fitted me, because of course it wasn't going to fit me. It's nothing to do with the system. It's to do with the fact that I was that sick that I would never fit in with that system. So yeah, it was a strange moment really to get diagnosed and say it was so much of a relief, but it just was nice to be believed. And obviously once you get diagnosis, that is not the end of the story, and that is a story that I will tell another day. I think my plan is probably to try and tell the story maybe like 3 years in 3 years chunks. So like maybe do a podcast where I tell what it was like from 11 to 13. So I think that's probably my plan. But that was what it was like to get diagnosed for me. And I'm really interested if people are listening to this and it's on YouTube, so I suppose technically watching a still photo of me at the same time. If people in the comments have also had their own experiences getting diagnosed, what it was like, were there similarities, was there differences, was it quicker, was it slower? I'm really curious to see how that experience was like for everyone else. But yeah, that I know is a short podcast, but I think 15 minutes of my voice is probably more than enough. And obviously, I'm unediting this. It's going up as is, so you will have my my weird little stumble of words, and you will have the car alarm and things like that. But I wanted to do this quite raw and honestly. I didn't want to over-edit it. I wanted it to be just my words as is, mistakes and all, because it's very truthful. It's what I'm feeling when I'm saying them, and it's what I'm thinking looking back, even though it's, I just turned 30 2 weeks ago. So it's a good while ago that I was 11 years old, but there's definitely elements and some bits I forgot, but there's a lot of it that I do remember that will be burned into my mind for life. And like I said, there's a story that I'm going to tell in a future episode that that is definitely, there's two things that happened in the next couple of years that shaped my experiences going forward. So I'll get into them another time. So yeah, you will get more podcasts in the future with me. I'm also hoping to cut together something. If people haven't checked out the documentary about making the film, it's called The Journey So Far. I really, really, really recommend it, which is weird to say because obviously it's a lot of me speaking again, and I've edited it, but it's also cast crew giving their sort of account of making it. And obviously if you're into filmmaking and the technical side of things and you want to make independent, very, very low budget things, I think there's a lot to be learned from it. But also, for anyone that doesn't know, we have an executive producer on the project who also does the poetry at the end of the episode. So some people might not notice that the poetry because they do sort of slot in quite well, but usually, give or take, the last like 30-40 seconds of the episodes, though the characters' words that they're saying is written by Malia. So Malia is diagnosed with ME, is 18, and is involved in the project and gives a lot of her stories, and that kind of shapes the stories going forward and what's came and what's been, because whilst the episodes do take large bits from my life, they now sort of take bits from Malia's life, and there's a bit, just from hearing other people's experiences, that all sort of goes into a melding pot, and that's what it becomes. But within the documentary, Malia talks about how she got involved in the project, what it's like to sort of share her story, and yeah, I just think that anyone that hasn't listened to that, it's worth checking out. But obviously, with it being a documentary, there's a lot of it cut down, so I'm hoping to maybe cut that into a podcast if I can. There was a large section where we talked about anything but Emmy, so I'd have to cut that out. So there's a lot of work to do, but that's something that might be coming as well. So I'm going to do some more bits like this, and yeah, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you're all staying safe during these times, and obviously it's hard because I'm a white male, but I just want to send a lot of support to what's going on in America. Obviously, I can never claim to understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of someone that, when they leave their house, could be arrested for doing nothing. But through having ME, I do know discrimination with disabilities and stuff like that. And it's an awful feeling to have, and I'm lucky because when you go into the real world outside of your friend circle, they're all really supportive. When you go to the shops when you're not during the quarantine, obviously people can't see my illness because if I'm that sick I won't be going out anyway, so they can't. But when I'm going out, they can't see my illness, so I'm not being judged for it by people who were just looking at me and judging me for my illness. And that's something that people of other ethnic backgrounds and races do face. They are judged leaving their house just based on their appearance, and it is absolutely unacceptable. It's 2020. Like, how is this still happening? I see the pictures, and yeah. And like I said, I am by no means the person that should be talking about this. Like, I really go and thoroughly recommend that you do your research, read accounts from people who have experienced it. Much like how, I would hope that people who wanted to learn about ME wouldn't go and listen to Ricky Gervais's stand-up routine about it, because obviously that's very insulting. And so I would hope that whilst I'm not being insulted, I'd hope that you would go and listen to experts and people who, because like my opinion always is that the people who's worth listening to are the people who've experienced it. Real life accounts are so important that people share their stories if they are anything, if they've got a disability. I think it's important that if you've experienced something different in life, or I suppose in the communities that are affected, it's not that different. But I think, listen to first world stories is always the way to go. So I thoroughly recommend that you do that, and obviously sending support to anyone that is affected. I hope you're all staying safe. I will hopefully have another podcast up in the next few weeks. So stay safe. Thanks for listening. Thank you.